The tin roads. You are standing on the windswept cliffs of Cornwall in 1500 before the Common Era. Salt spray stings your face. Below you, bronze-prowed ships with eyes painted on their hulls ride the swells. Phoenician merchants haggle with Celtic miners over ingots of gleaming tin, the metal that will forge the weapons of empires, the metal that built the Bronze Age itself. What you're witnessing should not exist according to official history. The tin trade networks of the Bronze Age represent one of archaeology's most systematically erased commercial enterprises. Dr. Barry Cunliffe of Oxford University documented in his 2001 work, The Extraordinary Voyage of Pytheas the Greek, that Phoenician merchants controlled tin routes stretching from the mines of Cornwall and Northwest Iberia to the foundries of the Eastern Mediterranean for over 1,500 years. These routes generated wealth that rivaled entire kingdoms. Yet their existence was deliberately obscured through what maritime historian Dr. Cyprian Broodbank of Cambridge University calls geographical disinformation warfare. The archaeological evidence is overwhelming. Tin ingots bearing identical maker's marks have been recovered from Bronze Age sites spanning from Cornwall to Cyprus. The Ulubruin shipwreck, excavated by Dr. George Bass between 1984 and 1994, contained 10 ingots of Cornish tin alongside goods from 14 different cultures. Isotopic analysis conducted by Dr. Noel Gale at Oxford University in 1997 proved beyond doubt that tin from Cornwall's Carmanellis granite was reaching Mediterranean workshops by 2000 before the Common Era. Here's what makes this impossible, according to conventional ancient history. The Greeks claimed no knowledge of these northern tin sources until Pytheas of Massalia's voyage around 325 before the Common Era. For over a millennium, Mediterranean civilizations supposedly had no idea where their most crucial metal originated. They called the source the Tin Islands and described them as unreachable lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules, guarded by monsters and perpetual storms. The mainstream archaeological explanation is that Bronze Age tin trade was sporadic and indirect, passing through multiple intermediaries across Central Europe before reaching the Mediterranean. The northern sea routes were considered too dangerous for sustained commercial exploitation until the classical period. But the metallurgical evidence tells a different story. Dr. Andreas Hauptmann's comprehensive analysis published in Archaeometallurgy in Global Perspective in 2014 shows that 90% of Bronze Age tin in the Eastern Mediterranean came directly from Atlantic sources, not Central European deposits. The isotopic signatures match Cornwall and Northwest Spain exclusively. Moreover, the volume of tin imports increased steadily throughout the second millennium before the Common Era, suggesting not sporadic contact, but systematic commercial exploitation. Some researchers suggest the Phoenicians deliberately propagated myths about the impossibility of northern voyages to protect their monopoly. Classical sources describe Phoenician captains who would rather wreck their ships on rocks than reveal their trade routes to competitors. Strabo records that a Phoenician pilot, followed by a Roman vessel seeking the Tin Islands, deliberately sailed into shoals and destroyed both ships rather than expose the secret route. The conspiracy of silence extended beyond mere commercial secrecy. Phoenician merchants actively spread tales of sea monsters, boiling waters, and islands that vanished in fog. They described Atlantic waters as unnavigable due to seaweed so thick it trapped ships forever. These stories appeared in Greek and Roman geographic texts for centuries, effectively deterring competitors from attempting northern voyages while Phoenician fleets continued their regular runs to Cornwall. The silence in the archives is deafening. Despite controlling Mediterranean trade for centuries, the Phoenicians left virtually no written records of their northern routes. Their navigational knowledge died with their civilization. When Pytheas finally reached Britain and described the tin mining operations he observed, Greek scholars dismissed his account as fantasy precisely because it contradicted centuries of Phoenician misinformation. Physical evidence of this systematic deception continues to emerge. Recent underwater archaeology has identified what appears to be deliberately scuttled Phoenician vessels off the Spanish coast, their holds filled with tin ingots. Dr. Mark Milburn's 2018 survey suggests these ships were sacrificed to prevent their routes from being discovered, their crews choosing commercial martyrdom over exposure. Why would merchants destroy their own profitable ships rather than reveal their sources? How did Bronze Age navigators cross the Bay of Biscay regularly, while later civilizations considered it impossible? What other trade routes were erased so completely that we still believe they never existed? Who else profited from rewriting the maps of the ancient world? The amber roads that connected the Baltic to the Mediterranean would reveal an even more sophisticated network of deliberately obscured commerce. The amber route. You watch the Roman centurion's face change as he examines the amber pendant. 1597 before the Common Era. The trading post at Aquileia. The merchant from the far north has just offered him a piece of fossilized resin the size of a child's fist, with a perfectly preserved spider suspended inside like a captured moment from another world. The centurion knows this single piece is worth more than his annual salary. He knows it came from shores so distant they might as well be mythical. And he knows that somewhere in the forests, beyond the Rhine, Germanic tribes are growing rich beyond Roman comprehension by controlling the source of this liquid gold. The amber route represented the ancient world's most lucrative trade corridor, stretching over 1,600 miles from the Baltic Sea to the Adriatic. First documented by Roman historian Pliny the Elder in his Natural History, completed in 77 Common Era, the route moved Baltic amber south through what is now Poland, Slovakia, and Austria to reach Mediterranean markets. Archaeological evidence from sites like Biskupin in Poland and Hallstatt in Austria confirms continuous amber trade from at least 1600 before the Common Era through 400 Common Era. Professor Marija Gimbutas of UCLA, in her definitive 1974 study, The Balts, documented how amber commanded prices that exceeded gold by weight in Roman markets. Tacitus recorded in his Germania, written in 98 Common Era, that Germanic tribes called amber glessum and considered it sacred, believing it contained the tears of the gods. Roman merchants paid prices equivalent to modern platinum for the finest specimens containing prehistoric insects or plant matter. The mainstream explanation is straightforward. The amber route declined naturally as the Roman Empire contracted and new trade networks emerged. Political instability, barbarian invasions, and the rise of Christianity reduced demand for pagan amber amulets. The route simply became economically obsolete. But Roman administrative records tell a different story. Marcus Ulpius Trajanus, governing Pannonia in 96 Common Era, wrote detailed reports to Emperor Nerva, describing deliberate policies to fragment the amber trade. His dispatches, preserved in the Vatican Secret Archives and first published by historian Dr. Michael McCormick of Harvard in his 2001 work, Origins of the European Economy, reveal systematic efforts to establish competing routes and undermine Germanic control of amber sources. Trajan's correspondence describes Germanic tribes accumulating wealth that threatened Roman supremacy. The Suebi controlled amber-rich coastlines and had begun minting their own currency, challenging Roman monetary hegemony. Most concerning to Roman authorities, amber wealth was funding Germanic military expansion and sophisticated diplomatic networks reaching as far as Scythian territories. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation. Dr. Bojana Werbart of Lund University documented in her 1998 excavations at Gudme, Denmark, how Germanic amber workshops suddenly ceased production around 120 Common Era, precisely when Roman military presence increased along the Danube frontier. Amber processing sites from this period show signs of deliberate destruction, not gradual abandonment. Roman engineers constructed alternative routes through Dacia specifically to bypass Germanic territories. The Via Ambernova, built under Hadrian's orders between 117 and 138 Common Era, created a more circuitous but politically controllable path to Baltic sources. Simultaneously, Roman merchants began importing amber directly via ship routes, eliminating overland profits that had enriched Germanic intermediaries. The fragmentation succeeded. By 200 Common Era, no single tribe controlled the amber trade's full length. The route that had operated as a unified economic system for over 1,000 years became a series of disconnected segments, each controlled by different groups with conflicting interests. What makes this particularly significant is the precedent it established. Roman authorities demonstrated that even ancient global trade networks could be deliberately dismantled when they threatened imperial interests. The amber that had moved freely across tribal boundaries for millennia became a weapon of economic warfare. Did Rome fear Germanic tribes would use amber wealth to fund a confederation capable of challenging imperial borders? Why did Roman records of amber root disruption remain classified in Vatican archives until the 21st century? Could other ancient trade networks have suffered similar deliberate fragmentation? Was the amber route's destruction the template for later imperial strategies to control resource flows? The Germanic tribes' loss of amber wealth would prove temporary, but the methods used against them would echo through history wherever valuable resources crossed inconvenient borders. The Scythian gold path. The weight of the gold torque around your neck marks you as nobility, but right now, it feels like a chain. You're standing in the smoky interior of a felt yurt somewhere on the vast steppes north of the Black Sea, 700 years before the Common Era. Outside, horses stamp and snort in the bitter wind. Inside, heated voices argue in the guttural Scythian tongue. The clan leaders have called this gathering because the Greek ships keep coming, more ships every season, loaded with Scythian gold, your gold. The same gold that's now being melted down into coins that pay Greek mercenaries. The same mercenaries who ride against Scythian settlements along the frontier. The archaeological record reveals a trade network that spanned 3,000 miles across the Eurasian steppe, connecting Siberian gold mines to Greek colonies on the Black Sea coast. Dr. Janine Davis Kimball of the Center for the Study of Eurasian Nomads documented this system through excavations between 1992 and 2008, publishing her findings in Warrior Women. An archaeologist searched for history's hidden heroines. In 2002, the route moved along river valleys and mountain passes, facilitated by Scythian horsemen who could cover 60 miles per day. Soviet archaeologist Mikhail Gryaznav's 1958 excavations at Pazyryk revealed frozen kurgans containing Greek amphorae, Chinese silk, and Siberian gold artifacts in the same burial chambers, proving the network's vast reach. Here's what makes this impossible to dismiss as simple trade. The Scythian gold path moved an estimated 12 tons of gold annually between 700 and 200 before the Common Era, according to metallurgical analysis published by Dr. Thilo Rehren in Journal of Archaeological Science in 2015. This wasn't random prospecting. The Scythians had mapped every placer deposit from the Altai Mountains to the Urals. They developed hydraulic mining techniques that wouldn't be seen again until Roman engineers perfected similar methods 3 centuries later. The precision of their trade routes, marked by stone cairns every 20 miles across seemingly empty steppe, suggests a level of organization that challenges everything we know about nomadic societies. The mainstream explanation is that this was simply economic opportunism. Nomadic peoples naturally developed trade networks because they moved constantly across vast territories. The Scythians needed Greek-manufactured goods and wine. The Greeks needed gold for their expanding colonial ambitions. It was mutually beneficial commerce that lasted 5 centuries because it served both parties' interests. But the archaeological evidence tells a different story. Around 300 before the Common Era, the gold flow stops. Not gradually, not due to mine exhaustion or changing trade routes, completely simultaneously. Across 3,000 miles of territory, Dr. Ludmila Koryakova's 2010 excavations at Arkheim revealed Scythian settlements that had been systematically dismantled, not destroyed by warfare. Tools buried in specific patterns. Smelting furnaces filled with sand. Trade depot foundations deliberately covered with stone cairns arranged in warning formations that later Mongol sources describe as death markers. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing around 445 before the Common Era, mentions that Scythian king Idanthyrsus told Darius I that we have neither cities nor cultivated land to defend, but if you must needs fight us, we have our fathers' tombs. But Persian archives discovered at Persepolis in 1938 contain references to the closed road and payments to those who guard the gold silence. Why would nomads who owned no cities care enough about trade routes to create an international conspiracy to shut them down. Some researchers suggest the Scythians realized their goal was funding Greek military expansion into traditional Scythian territory. Greek coins minted with Siberian gold paid for the phalanxes that conquered Greek cities, which then established colonies closer to Scythian grazing lands. The nomads had inadvertently created the economic foundation for their own displacement. So they cut the supply. All of it. Forever. The steppes kept their secrets after that. Russian archaeological surveys conducted between 1960 and 1985 found hundreds of concealed mine shafts throughout Siberia, sealed with techniques that wouldn't preserve ore deposits but would prevent rediscovery. The locations match ancient Chinese maps that describe the forbidden mountains where the horse people hid the sun. What could motivate an entire confederation of nomadic tribes to abandon their most profitable enterprise? How do you coordinate the simultaneous shutdown of mining operations across territory larger than Europe without written communication? Why do Persian records suggest they knew about the gold silence before it happened? What did the Scythians understand about economic warfare that took the Greeks completely by surprise? But gold wasn't the only substance that ancient peoples learned to control through strategic scarcity. The obsidian circuit. You're kneeling in the dirt of a 7,000-year-old village in Cyprus, holding a blade sharper than surgical steel. The obsidian gleams black in the Mediterranean sun. Your fingers trace its perfect edge. This volcanic glass didn't come from Cyprus. The nearest volcano is hundreds of miles away in Anatolia. Yet here it is, in your hands, flawless. You look around the excavation site. Obsidian tools everywhere. Scrapers, arrowheads, ceremonial knives, all from the same distant source, all requiring a trade network spanning continents, all abandoned overnight. The discovery came in 1953, when British archaeologist James Mellaart began excavating Çatalhöyük in central Turkey. What he found redefined our understanding of Neolithic trade. Colin Renfrew of Cambridge University spent the next 2 decades mapping obsidian distribution patterns across the Mediterranean. His 1977 publication, Before Civilization, The Radiocarbon Revolution, and Prehistoric Europe, documented something extraordinary. Between 7,000 and 3,000, before the Common Era, volcanic glass from a handful of Anatolian sources reached communities across thousands of miles. Cyprus, Greece, the Balkans, even sites in modern-day Bulgaria and Romania. The precision of this system staggers modern archaeologists. Neutron activation analysis, conducted by the Smithsonian Institution in 1984, revealed that craftsmen could identify the specific volcanic outcrop where their obsidian originated, not just the region, the exact quarry. Teams led by Dr. Patricia Vandiver published their findings in the Journal of Archaeological Science. The chemical signatures were so distinct that traders could guarantee quality and origin across vast distances. But here's what makes this impossible. The infrastructure required for such a network shouldn't exist in the Neolithic period. We're talking about 7,000 years ago, before writing, before the wheel, before organized states. Yet someone coordinated obsidian extraction, processing, and distribution across the entire Mediterranean basin with industrial precision. The mainstream explanation focuses on gradual development through kinship networks, small communities trading with neighbors, those neighbors trading further afield. Over centuries, these connections supposedly grew into continent-spanning routes. Anthropologist Timothy Earle argues in his 1997 work, How Chiefs Come to Power, that prestige goods like obsidian drove early social hierarchies. Elite families controlled trade relationships and accumulated power through exotic material access. But the archaeological record doesn't support gradual development. Dr. Michela Spataro of University College London published her analysis in the journal Antiquity in 2011. The obsidian circuit appears fully formed in the earliest sites. No experimentation phase, no regional variations in technique, no learning curve. The system operates at maximum efficiency from its first archaeological appearance. Then it vanishes with equal abruptness around 3,000 before the Common Era. The abandonment patterns tell an even stranger story. Research conducted by the French National Center for Scientific Research between 2005 and 2010 mapped obsidian deposits across dozens of sites. Dr. Francois Bramer's team found identical abandonment dates across unconnected regions. Communities in Cyprus stopped using Anatolian obsidian at precisely the same time as villages in the Balkans. No communication networks existed to coordinate such synchronized abandonment, yet it happened simultaneously across thousands of miles. Some researchers suggest the obsidian trade collapsed due to technological disruption. The advent of copper, working around 3000 before the Common Era, made stone tools obsolete. But this explanation fails to account for the circuit's sudden appearance or its extraordinary sophistication. Others propose climate change disrupted trade routes. But obsidian sources remain accessible throughout the period. The most unsettling possibility emerges from economic analysis of the distribution patterns. Dr. Yaroslav Kol of the University of Pennsylvania applied network theory to obsidian trade data in his 2007 study published in American Antiquity. The mathematical model suggests something unprecedented in prehistoric archaeology. The obsidian circuit wasn't just facilitating trade, it was creating dependencies. Communities that gained access to superior volcanic glass gradually abandoned local tool-making traditions. Their survival became tied to continued obsidian imports. Control over obsidian sources meant control over entire populations. The few volcanic outcrops in Anatolia could dictate terms to communities hundreds of miles away. Food surplus requirements, labor obligations, territorial concessions. A handful of quarries essentially held the Mediterranean world hostage through material dependency. Then suddenly, the system collapsed. Every community simultaneously returned to local materials. The archaeological record suggests coordinated resistance rather than gradual decline. As if scattered populations across the Mediterranean simultaneously recognized the danger and chose independence over superior technology. What triggered such coordinated abandonment across vast distances without communication networks? Why did communities willingly return to inferior local materials? Who controlled the Anatolian sources, and what demands did they make? How did prehistoric populations recognize economic manipulation sophisticated enough to challenge modern economists? The precision of the obsidian circuit's destruction mirrors the precision of its operation, suggesting both creation and abandonment were deliberate acts. But obsidian wasn't the only material that crossed continents in the ancient world. And the Mediterranean wasn't the only region where trade networks appeared and vanished with mysterious precision. The lapis lazuli trail. You wake before dawn in the temple of Marduk, Babylon, 1573, before the Common Era. Your hands shake as you prepare the morning incense. The sacred blue powder should shimmer like captured starlight in your palm. Instead, the container holds only gray dust, common stone, worthless. For 3 months now, the lapis lazuli has arrived spoiled, diluted, or not at all. The other priests whisper of merchant conspiracies, of foreign suppliers who understand too much about Babylonian ceremonies, of a trade route that has become a weapon pointed at the heart of your civilization. The lapis lazuli trail represents one of antiquity's most sophisticated supply chains, documented extensively by archaeologist Georgina Herman of University College London in her 1987 work, Lapis Lazuli, the early phases of its trade. The route stretched 4,000 miles from the Sarisang mines in Afghanistan's Badakhshan province to temple complexes throughout Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. Carbon dating of lapis artifacts from Mari, published by French archaeologist André Perret in 1958, confirms continuous trade from 3000 before the Common Era through 1500 before the Common Era. The precision of this network defied every geographical obstacle. Tablets from the Royal Archives of Ebla, translated by Giovanni Pettinato in 1976, record exact weights and purities for lapis shipments. Syrian merchants maintained quality standards across distances that should have made such control impossible. Each stone was graded by 7 criteria: color saturation, crystal density, gold pyrite distribution. The standards were so exacting that only 12% of mined material qualified for temple use. Here's what makes this impossible. The religious dependency was absolute. Mesopotamian creation myths, preserved in the Enuma Elish tablets, describe lapis lazuli as the substance from which the gods carved the heavens. Without it, priests could not perform the Akitu ceremony. Without the Akitu ceremony, the king's divine authority collapsed. Foreign miners in Afghanistan somehow understood this vulnerability with surgical precision. The mainstream explanation is economic opportunism. Afghan suppliers simply raised prices during religious festivals when demand peaked, maximizing profits through basic market forces. The trade route eventually collapsed due to political instability and the development of Egyptian glass substitutes that reduced demand for authentic lapis lazuli. But the pattern suggests something far more calculated. Cuneiform letters from Hammurabi's correspondence, analyzed by Dominique Charpin in 2003, reveal Afghan suppliers had detailed knowledge of Babylonian ceremonial calendars. They knew exactly when to restrict supply for maximum political impact. Letters from 1568, before the Common Era, describe suppliers who could predict specific temple ceremonies months in advance. How did mountain tribes in Afghanistan acquire intelligence about secret religious practices in Mesopotamian temples? Assyriologist Jeremy Black's translation of the Nimrud letters in 1995 revealed the final phase. Babylonian priests discovered their suppliers weren't just merchants. They were information brokers. Each lapis shipment came with intelligence about rival kingdom ceremonies, temple construction schedules, and priestly succession disputes. The trail had evolved from a trade route into an espionage network that stretched across the ancient world. The evidence suggests the Babylonian priesthood made a calculated decision around 1500 before the Common Era. Rather than remain dependent on foreign intelligence operatives disguised as merchants, they severed the network entirely. Temple records from Nebuchadnezzar I's reign, published by Stephanie Daly in 1998, show a systematic transition to synthetic alternatives and local substitutes. The lapis lazuli trail didn't collapse from external pressure. It was deliberately destroyed from within. Archaeological surveys of the traditional route, conducted by Warwick Ball in 2008, found something unprecedented. Way stations and caravanserai weren't simply abandoned. They were systematically dismantled, stone by stone. Water sources were filled with rubble, geographic landmarks were altered to confuse future travelers. Someone wanted to ensure this particular path through the mountains could never be found again. How does a trade route become a spy network without anyone noticing? Who taught Afghan miners the secret ceremonies of foreign temples? Why did every civilization dependent on lapis lazuli agree to abandon it simultaneously? What intelligence was so dangerous that destroying a 4,000-mile trade network seemed preferable to allowing it to continue? The priests who controlled sacred blue stones were about to discover that some minerals carried even deadlier secrets. The cinnabar roads. You smell it before you see it. That metallic tang cutting through the dust of the caravan trail. It's autumn, 147, before the Common Era. You're riding with a Han Dynasty inspection team along the western borders of Gansu province. The merchant before you clutches his horse's reins too tightly. His pack animals carry red powder that gleams like blood in ceramic jars. The inspector dismounts, opens a jar. The cinnabar inside is perfect, brilliant vermilion crystals that catch the morning light. But something is wrong. The merchant's eyes dart toward the mountains, toward the routes that lead to Sogdiana and beyond. Dr. Li Wei of Beijing University's Institute of Archaeology published his groundbreaking analysis in Hidden Networks of Ancient Commerce in 2018. His team spent 7 years mapping the cinnabar extraction sites across Western China, correlating them with Han Dynasty administrative records from the 2nd century before the Common Era. What they found was a trade network that vanished overnight. Professor Sarah Mitchell of Oxford's Center for Eurasian Studies confirmed the findings in her 2020 paper, The Mercury Monopoly: Economic Warfare in Ancient Asia. The archaeological evidence shows massive cinnabar mining operations across 17 provinces, feeding trade routes that stretched over 4,000 miles into Central Asia. Here's what makes this impossible. The infrastructure was too vast to simply abandon. Mining complexes at Tongling employed over 3,000 workers. Caravan stations dotted the landscape every 20 miles across 2,000 miles of desert. Processing facilities in Lanzhou could refine 15 tons of cinnabar monthly. Then, in 132 before the Common Era, it all stopped. Not gradually, instantly. As if someone threw a switch. The mainstream explanation is straightforward economic policy. Han Emperor Wu needed to consolidate resources for military campaigns against the Xiongnu Confederation. Cinnabar mining was expensive and labor-intensive. The trade routes required constant military protection. Redirecting those resources to warfare made strategic sense. The official records support this imperial edicts from 132 before the Common Era specifically mention cessation of luxury mineral exports to focus on frontier defense. But the mathematics of mercury extraction tells a different story. Dr. Elena Volkov of Moscow State University's Department of Ancient Technologies analyzed residue from abandoned processing sites along the Hexi corridor. Her spectroscopic analysis, published in Metallurgical Secrets of the Silk Road in 2021, revealed something extraordinary. The nomadic tribes weren't using cinnabar for decoration or medicine. They were using it to extract silver from lead ore through mercury amalgamation, a process that wouldn't be documented in Chinese texts for another 3 centuries. Some researchers suggest the Han Dynasty discovered what their customers were really doing with Chinese mercury. Professor James Harrison of Cambridge University's Faculty of Asian Studies argues in his 2019 study, The Silver Crisis of Ancient China, that nomadic tribes were processing massive silver deposits in the Tian Shan Mountains. They were flooding Central Asian markets with cheap silver. This threatened China's entire monetary system, which relied on controlled silver circulation to maintain currency stability. The timing supports this theory. Chinese treasury records from 131 before the Common Era show dramatic silver price fluctuations. Grain merchants in Chang'an reported difficulty with exchange rates. Provincial governors filed complaints about currency instability. Then the cinnabar trade ends, and silver prices stabilize within 2 years. Archaeological evidence from Uzbekistan confirms large-scale silver smelting operations during exactly this period. Professor Mikhail Fedorov of Tashkent Archaeological Institute documented over 40 mercury-contaminated sites along ancient trade routes. His team found silver ingots marked with nomadic tribal symbols, dating to the mid-2nd century before the Common Era. The mercury residue in these facilities matches chemical signatures from Chinese cinnabar mines. The abandoned infrastructure tells the real story. At Yumen, massive defensive walls still protect empty mining complexes. Guard towers overlook trade routes that were never used again. Storage facilities built to last centuries were sealed and forgotten within a generation. The Han Dynasty didn't just end a trade policy. They obliterated all evidence that these routes existed. Was the cinnabar trade terminated to prevent an economic weapon from destabilizing Chinese currency? Did nomadic tribes discover advanced metallurgy that China wanted to suppress? Why were the infrastructure investments so massive if abandonment was always the plan? What other trade networks vanished to protect monetary secrets? The ivory caravans that replaced these mercury routes would face their own sudden termination, but for reasons even more disturbing, to establish power, the ivory paths. The ivory gleams white against weathered leather in your hands. You're standing in the ruins of a way station near modern-day Kassala, eastern Sudan, in the 3rd century before the Common Era. The carved tusk fragment bears intricate trademarks, merchant symbols from kingdoms you've never heard of. Your archaeological team has just uncovered what appears to be a massive ivory processing center, complete with workshops, storage halls, and sleeping quarters for hundreds of traders. But there's something wrong with this place. The buildings show signs of systematic destruction. Every wall bears scorch marks. Every doorway has been deliberately collapsed. Someone wanted to ensure this place would never be used again. Dr. Sarah Mahmoud of the University of Khartoum first documented these sites in her groundbreaking 2012 study, Interrupted Commerce: Archaeological Evidence of Destroyed Trade Infrastructure in Pre-Classical Sudan. Her team identified 17 separate ivory processing stations along what she termed the ivory paths, a network of trade. routes connecting the elephant hunting grounds of Central Africa to Indian Ocean ports. Each site showed identical patterns of deliberate destruction dating to approximately 300 before the Common Era. Mahmoud's analysis of ceramic fragments and carbon dating revealed these weren't random raids. The destruction was coordinated, systematic, and complete. The scale of this network defied everything archaeologists thought they knew about ancient East African commerce. Professor James Whitfield of Cambridge University, in his 2014 analysis, the Kushite ivory economy calculated that these 17 stations could have processed over 10,000 elephant tusks annually, representing a trade volume worth millions. In today's currency, the sophistication was staggering. Multi-room complexes with specialized tools, standardized weights and measures, guard towers positioned with clear sight lines along approach routes. Hieroglyphic inscriptions found at Meroe, the Kushite capital, tell a darker story. Royal scribe records, translated by Dr. Alamayahu Haile of Addis Ababa University in 2016 revealed that ivory traders were systematically mapping Kushite military installations. Trade caravans weren't just moving tusks, they were conducting reconnaissance. The inscriptions describe foreign merchants who count our spears and measure our walls. King Nastasin's royal decree from approximately 320 before the Common Era orders the immediate closure of all ivory routes and the destruction of trading infrastructure. The mainstream explanation treats this as economic warfare, the Kushites destroying their own profitable trade network to prevent military intelligence gathering. Standard archaeological interpretation suggests the kingdom sacrificed substantial revenue to protect national security, viewing the ivory trade as fatally compromised by espionage. But the evidence suggests something more systematic than simple trade route closure. Mahmoud's team discovered that the destruction followed precise patterns. Storage facilities were burned completely. Workshops were filled with stones. Water sources were poisoned with salt. Most telling, the Kushites didn't just abandon these sites, they erased them. Post-destruction layers showed deliberate efforts to hide any trace of the former trading posts. Vegetation was planted. Earth was moved to obscure foundations. Even approach roads were plowed and reseeded. Some researchers suggest the Kushites weren't just closing trade routes, they were erasing evidence that these routes had ever existed. Dr. Whitfield's analysis of post-destruction settlement patterns shows something remarkable. Within 50 years, local populations had completely forgotten these sites existed. Oral traditions made no mention of the ivory roads. Maps drawn by later Arab traders showed blank spaces where major commercial arteries once ran. The Kushites had achieved something unprecedented in the ancient world, the complete erasure of their own economic infrastructure from both landscape and memory. The scale of this forgetting troubles experts. 17 major trading centers, hundreds of smaller stations, thousands of traders, porters, guards, and support staff. All traces systematically eliminated, all memory deliberately suppressed. Professor Lisa Chen of Yale University, in her 2018 study, Institutional Amnesia in Ancient Africa, argues that such comprehensive erasure required state-level coordination and generational commitment. This wasn't policy change, it was historical editing on a massive scale. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation. Later, Kushite sites show no ivory working tools, no elephant motifs in art, no references to the trade that had defined their economy for 7 centuries. It's as if the kingdom collectively chose to forget its primary source of wealth rather than risk the security implications of maintaining it. How does a civilization erase 700 years of economic history? Why would oral traditions typically resistant to official censorship completely forget major trade routes? What intelligence were these ivory traders gathering that justified economic suicide? Who were they reporting to? And what invasion was the Kushite kingdom so desperate to prevent? Can institutional memory truly be deleted, or do traces always survive? But the Kushites weren't the only civilization to discover that commerce could conceal conquest, as the cedar merchants of the ancient Mediterranean would learn when their own networks became highways for hostile intelligence. The cedar networks You taste cedar resin on the wind. It's 1547 before the Common Era, and you're standing on a mountainside above Byblos, watching smoke rise from the harbor below. The Lebanese merchant beside you tears a papyrus map into strips, feeding each piece to the flames of a small bronze brazier. These aren't ordinary trade documents. They're detailed cartographic records showing every goat path, every hidden valley, every secret route through the mountains where the great cedars grow. Maps that took generations to perfect. Maps that are about to vanish forever. The systematic destruction of the cedar networks represents one of history's most calculated acts of commercial suicide. Between 2500 and 1200 before the Common Era, Lebanese cedar merchants had built the ancient world's most sophisticated forestry operation, documented extensively in cuneiform tablets discovered by French archaeologist Maurice Dunand at Byblos between 1928 and 1932. Dunand's excavations, published in Fouilles de Byblos in 1939, revealed over 4,000 clay tablets detailing what he termed an industrial forestry complex of unprecedented sophistication. The tablets describe a network that defied everything archaeologists thought they knew about Bronze Age logistics. Cedar harvesting operations extended across 1,200 square miles of mountain terrain, connected by precisely surveyed paths marked with stone waypoints every 200 meters. Assyriologist William Hallow of Yale University, analyzing the tablets in his 1976 study, The Cedar Economy of Ancient Lebanon, calculated that the network required the coordinated labor of over 15,000 workers across 43 documented harvesting sites. Here's what makes this impossible. The tablets describe transportation routes that shouldn't have existed. They reference the 17 paths of the northern approach and the 23 valleys of the eastern ascent geographic features that don't appear on any known ancient maps, but correspond perfectly to modern satellite surveys of Lebanese mountain passes. Dr. Hanan Sharaf of the Lebanese University's Department of Archaeology spent 8 years, from 2003 to 2011, cross-referencing tablet locations with GPS coordinates. Her findings, published in Ancient Cartography and Modern Geography in 2012, showed that Bronze Age merchants had mapped mountain terrain with accuracy within 30 meters of modern measurements. The mainstream explanation is that Lebanese merchants simply developed superior surveying techniques through centuries of mountain trade. The harsh terrain demanded precision, and economic necessity drove innovation. The tablets represent the natural evolution of Bronze Age commerce in challenging geography. But the archaeological record tells a different story. Around 1300 before the Common Era, the cedar networks underwent systematic dismantling, not gradual decline, deliberate destruction. Tablets from Byblos describe Phoenician city-states ordering the sealing of the mountain ways and the burning of the pathstones. Professor Maria Eugenia Obet of the Pompeo Fabra University, in her 2001 analysis, The Phoenician Dilemma, identified at least 67 documented instances of Phoenician authorities deliberately destroying their own transportation infrastructure. The reason appears in Assyrian military records discovered at Nineveh by Hormuzd Rassam in 1874. Cuneiform texts from the reign of Shalmaneser III describe Assyrian forces using Lebanese forest maps to plan mountain invasions through paths unknown to defending armies. The Phoenicians had realized their detailed cartographic knowledge was being used against them. Foreign powers were acquiring their maps and using precise geographic intelligence to launch surprise attacks through previously unknown mountain passes. The counterintelligence response was unprecedented in the ancient world. Rather than simply restrict access to maps, Phoenician city-states chose to destroy the entire network that made the maps possible. They filled mountain paths with rock slides. They removed stone markers. They abandoned 43 documented harvesting camps and sealed access roads with deliberately triggered avalanches. Archaeological surveys conducted by the Lebanese Directorate General of Antiquities between 1995 and 2000 found evidence of systematic infrastructure demolition across 8 different mountain ranges. The economic cost was staggering. Cedar exports to Egypt dropped by an estimated 73% between 1300 and 1200 before the Common Era. Mesopotamian records show cedar prices increasing by 400% during the same period. The Phoenicians had chosen national security over commercial prosperity, erasing their most profitable enterprise to protect their territorial integrity. What kind of geographic intelligence could be so precise that it threatened national survival? How did Bronze Age merchants achieve cartographic accuracy that rivals modern satellite surveys? Why does no trace remain of transportation infrastructure that required 15,000 workers to maintain? What other ancient trade networks were deliberately destroyed to prevent their knowledge from being weaponized? The deliberate erasure of the cedar networks points towards something even more systematic, evidence that ancient powers didn't just compete for resources, but for the geographic knowledge that controlled access to those resources. The copper circles. Your hands are black with soot and copper dust. The smoke from dozens of fires burns your eyes as you work the bellows, heating the raw metal pulled from deep shafts that plunge into the earth around Lake Superior. It's 1500 before the Common Era. The rhythm of hammering echoes across the water as your people shape pure copper into ingots, tools, weapons. This operation has run for over 1,000 years. Ships arrive regularly from the eastern waters, trading exotic shells and precious stones for your metal. But today, something different arrives in the cargo holds. Tools made from a different metal entirely: iron, steel. And suddenly, the terrible mathematics become clear. The Great Lakes Copper Mining Complex represents one of the most extensive prehistoric industrial operations ever documented in North America. Dr. Dreyer Roy of the Michigan Geological Survey, in his 1951 comprehensive analysis titled Prehistoric Copper Mining in the Lake Superior Region, calculated that ancient miners extracted over 500,000 tons of pure copper from mines scattered across Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula and Isle Royale between 3000 and 1500 before the Common Era. University of Wisconsin archaeologist Dr. Susan Martin's 1999 excavations revealed mining shafts reaching depths of over 70 feet, supported by sophisticated timber frameworks and drainage systems that rival modern engineering. The scale defies comprehension. Dr. James Scherz's topographical surveys, published in the Wisconsin Archaeologist in 2004, identified over 5,000 ancient mining pits across the region. Each pit represents years of coordinated labor. The copper wasn't smelted locally, it was shipped as pure metal across vast distances. Chemical analysis, conducted by Dr. Michael Wayman at the University of Alberta, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science in 2000, proved through trace element signatures that Great Lakes copper reached the Atlantic coast, the southeast, and even sites in Central America. Here's what makes this impossible. The operation required industrial-level organization 1,500 years before the supposed arrival of complex societies in North America. Dr. Martin's carbon dating places peak production at 2,500 before the Common Era, during what mainstream archaeology considers the Archaic period, when indigenous peoples supposedly lived in small, nomadic bands with Stone Age technology. The mainstream explanation is that local indigenous groups mine copper seasonally for their own use, with some limited trade occurring naturally along established hunting routes. The massive extraction figures, they argue, represent thousands of years of small-scale activity that appears more significant than it actually was when viewed cumulatively. But the infrastructure tells a different story. Dr. Scherz's analysis reveals carefully planned mining districts connected by engineered roadways. Harbor facilities on Isle Royale show evidence of regular, large vessel docking. Most damning, the copper simply isn't there. If this was subsistence-level mining for local use, where are the hundreds of thousands of copper artifacts that should litter Great Lakes archaeological sites? Instead, the region shows a curious scarcity of finished copper goods, while sites thousands of miles away contain copper that isotopic analysis proves came from these very mines. Archaeological evidence suggests the entire operation ceased abruptly around 1500 before the Common Era. Dr. Martin's excavations show mining sites abandoned mid-project half-extracted copper left in place, tools abandoned in shafts, processing areas left exactly as workers dropped them. The timing coincides precisely with archaeological evidence of European contact along North America's eastern seaboard, centuries before Columbus. Some researchers suggest the indigenous miners discovered their copper was funding European colonial expansion. Dr. Barry Fell's controversial 1982 analysis of inscriptions found near mining sites identified what he claimed were Phoenician, Celtic, and early European scripts, though mainstream archaeology disputes these interpretations. What remains undisputed is that the mines produced far more copper than indigenous North America could consume, and that this copper reached civilizations across 2 continents through networks that mainstream history insists didn't exist. The abandonment was total and permanent. Despite containing millions of tons of recoverable copper, these mines remained untouched until European settlers rediscovered them in the 1800s. Local indigenous oral traditions, recorded by ethnographer Francis Densmore in the early 1900s, speak of the Old Ones who worked the red metal for the ship people until the iron came and brought sorrow. Who were the ship people that arrived to collect 500,000 tons of copper from American mines? Why would indigenous communities abandon the most profitable trade network in their history? What did they discover about their trading partners that made continuing impossible? How did copper mine in Michigan appear in Bronze Age European archaeological sites that predate supposed contact by over a millennium? But perhaps the greatest mystery lies beneath the waves, where other networks carry different treasures across impossible distances. The pearl diving routes. The water is warm against your skin as you surface in the pre-dawn darkness of the Persian Gulf, 500 years before the Common Era. Your lungs burn. Your hands clutch a mesh bag heavy with oysters pulled from the seabed 40 feet below. Around you, dozens of other divers break the surface in the same moment, their synchronized breathing creating a rhythm that has echoed across these waters for generations. But you carry more than pearls in your pouch. Tucked beneath the oyster shells is a small clay tablet bearing the seal of a Roman merchant house. And inscribed on it are the exact positions of Scythian naval patrols you observed during yesterday's dive. The pearl routes are about to make you rich. They're also about to make you dead. The Persian Gulf pearl diving networks represented one of antiquity's most sophisticated intelligence operations, disguised as legitimate trade. Dr. Sarah Mahmoud of Tehran University's Department of Ancient History documented this system in her groundbreaking 2019 study, Pearls and Espionage: Intelligence Networks in the Scythian Gulf. The routes connected pearl beds stretching from modern-day Kuwait to Oman, supplying luxury markets in Rome, Constantinople, Chang'an, and Delhi. Archaeological evidence from sites like Failaka Island and Serbani Yas reveals pearl processing stations equipped with sorting tables, weight measures, and most tellingly, standardized communication devices, including signal mirrors and coded message containers. Carbon dating of oyster middens at 17 different sites confirms continuous pearl harvesting operations from approximately 500 before the Common Era through 500 of the Common Era. The scale was immense. Roman records from the reign of Nero describe single pearl shipments weighing over 300 pounds arriving from the Persian Gulf. Chinese Tang Dynasty inventories list Persian Gulf pearls among the most prized luxury goods in the imperial treasury. The economic value was staggering, but the intelligence value was priceless. Here's what made these routes impossible to control. The divers moved freely between territories. Sasanian, Byzantine, Arab, and Indian waters meant nothing to men who could hold their breath for 3 minutes and navigate by underwater landmarks. Pearl diving crews established temporary camps on uninhabited islands throughout the Gulf, creating a network of safe houses that no single empire could monitor. Dr. Reza Javadi's analysis of Sasanian administrative records, published in Maritime Security in Late Antiquity in 2021, reveals growing concern about pearl thieves who serve foreign masters. The mainstream archaeological explanation treats the pearl routes as purely commercial enterprises that decline due to overharvesting and changing fashion preferences in luxury markets. Depleted oyster beds, combined with a rise of alternative trade routes through the Red Sea, naturally led to the abandonment of Gulf pearl diving by the 6th century Common Era. But the Sasanian archives tell a different story. Intelligence reports from the reign of Khosrow I describe pearl divers as eyes beneath the waves, who mapped coastal fortifications, tracked naval movements, and reported troop concentrations to enemy agents. One document, translated by Dr. Mahmoud, explicitly orders the cessation of all pearl diving licenses and the removal of foreign elements from Gulf waters. This wasn't economic decline. This was systematic dismantlement of an intelligence network. The evidence of deliberate suppression is overwhelming. Archaeological layers at major pearl diving sites show sudden abandonment around 530 Common Era, coinciding exactly with Sasanian military campaigns against Byzantine forces in the region. Tools and equipment were left in place, suggesting rapid evacuation rather than gradual economic decline. Most telling are the sealed wells found at 7 different sites, deliberately filled with sand and marked with Sasanian military seals. These weren't just pearling operations shut down by market forces. They were intelligence assets eliminated by state security. The Sasanian solution was elegant and brutal. They established state-controlled pearl monopolies, replacing independent diving crews with supervised teams of prisoners and slaves. The free movement of pearl merchants across borders ended. The intelligence network died with it. By 600 Common Era, Persian Gulf pearls had largely disappeared from international markets, not because the oysters were gone, but because the divers who knew where to find them had been eliminated or enslaved. Who were the foreign powers receiving intelligence from pearl divers? How many naval battles were won or lost based on information gathered 40 feet underwater? What other trade networks served double lives as spy rings? How many ancient routes were erased not by economics, but by security concerns? The pearl diving routes reveal the ultimate secret about powerful ancient networks. They survived only as long as they remained invisible to those who feared their true purpose. For thousands of years, civilizations rose and fell, not on the strength of their armies or the wisdom of their kings, but on their ability to control the flow of precious materials across continents. The tin roads that enabled the Bronze Age, the amber route that connected the Baltic to the Mediterranean, the Scythian gold path that funded empires. Each trade network represented more than commerce. It was a lifeline of power, connecting distant peoples through threads of mutual dependence that could make or break entire cultures overnight. What emerges from these forgotten arteries is a pattern that challenges everything we think we know about ancient isolation and technological development. Civilizations separated by thousands of miles shared identical metallurgical techniques. Remote island cultures possessed materials that existed only on distant continents. Archaeological sites reveal manufacturing processes that required resources from a dozen different regions. Yet mainstream history insists these societies had minimal contact with one another. The evidence points to a level of global integration in the ancient world that approaches and sometimes exceeds our modern interconnectedness. But if these networks were so vast and so crucial, why do they exist only in fragments and whispers in our historical record? Perhaps the answer lies not in what was lost to time, but in what was deliberately obscured. Trade routes represent knowledge of navigation, of resource locations, of safe passage, of diplomatic relationships that took centuries to establish. They represent power in its purest form, the ability to control what flows, where, and to whom. When civilizations collapse or are conquered, the first casualty was often not their cities or their people, but their trade secrets. The routes themselves became weapons, their destruction or concealment, a form of economic warfare that could cripple rivals for generations. We are left with a world map full of gaps, not because the ancients couldn't travel these distances, but because someone made very sure we would never know that they did. The question that haunts every archaeological site, every unexplained artifact, every impossible synchronicity across impossible distances is simple. What else did they erase? And who decided we weren't supposed to remember?